Hi, I'm Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. My guest tonight is former Congressman Nick Rahall. Nick served as a representative from West Virginia to Congress for 19 terms from 1977 to 2015. Long-standing member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and served on natural resources as well. He currently is on the board of directors of the World Affairs Council here in Washington and has just returned from a trip to the Middle East. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Thank you, Jim. Happy to be with you.
It was a study tour. You went to several countries in the region, but I actually want to focus, as the map, the flag behind us shows, on Lebanon. You spent quite a bit of time there and had some in-depth conversations with people. I want to see if you can help us understand some of the current difficulties that the country is facing. First of all, there's a governmental paralysis in the country. There's no president, hasn't been one for 2 years. Parliament can't get a quorum because sides are staying away because there's a difference of opinion of who the presidential candidate should be. And Parliament elects the president. It's not a direct election. What accounts for the paralysis, the state of division that exists in the country right now?
Well, first, Jim, I certainly want to thank Arab American Institute for putting together this study tour. The participants in it were elected Arab American officials from across the country, very good group of people that thoroughly enjoyed their visit to the region and learned a great deal. The answer to your question is, in Lebanon, I guess the Lebanese are being Lebanese, and they have certainly put up with a lot. 19 months now without the election of a president. The country is, when you look at it, as miraculous as it is, and consider everything going on around Lebanon, it's relatively calm. And there's a lot of misperception in this country that let's stay away from Lebanon. There's a State Department travel warning, not a ban, but a warning on travel to Lebanon. And all that scares Americans away. But I would say they should not stay away from Lebanon. Yes, tourism has been hurt there and in many parts of the region, but the Lebanese are happy to receive Americans, and they love Americans. And on a people-to-people basis, we really get along. But there is a government paralysis right now in that they cannot get together and elect a president. Many different factions are at play here. It's highly complicated. There's more sides to the factionalism in Lebanon than there is to Rubik's Cube. It keeps changing. Some would say the Christians are united today because of the Zogby alliance, but that's really not the case. And the Lebanese are looking at it as, well, there they go again. Politicians playing games for their own special interests. That's how the people of Lebanon see it.
The issue in Lebanon is that the prime minister is a Sunni Muslim, the speaker of the parliament is a Shia Muslim, and the president is Christian. Christians are looking at this paralysis and the lack of election of a president as putting them at risk, denying them a key voice. You met with some Christian leaders in the country, Christian political leaders, I should say.
Yes.
How are they feeling about that? Are they feeling compromised, threatened, weakened?
Well, the rivalries within the Christians are probably more severe than any rivalries in that country, all based on personal past histories. The fact that Saad Hariri had joined with longtime rival Frangia in a coalition
Saad Hariri coming from
the
a Sunni led coalition, and Frangia being a Christian leader from the opposite, the Shia-led coalition.
Correct, and Saad Hariri being Saudi-backed, and Frangia being one of Assad's closest friends in Syria, despite the past history. So the Christians saw that as a slap in the face to Zogby, and therefore he, in a personal effort to get back at Saad Hariri, in my opinion, said, well, I'm going to join forces with Ayoun,
who is the Hezbollah, Shia-led Christian-backed presidential candidate.
Exactly. Thanks for those clarifications.
So it is a Rubik's Cube.
Yes.
The question is, the Rubik's Cube isn't being solved. It's still in play. You answered it in part by saying tourists don't be afraid, but with the government institutions not functioning, how does the country operate? I mean, what's it like being there?
Well, if you talk to the little shop owner on the street, which I did in buying souvenirs and that type thing, you know, they laugh at it and say it's just usual Lebanese politics, each one looking out for his own personal interests. My life is going to go on. I'm going to continue to run my store, get up every morning, worry about my family, just like Americans do every day. But they're totally tuned out to what's going on in the political arena. And you're right that there's a vacuum there, but yet it seems that's what allows Lebanon to survive. Some of the basic necessary administrative functions are getting done by the cabinet, but not when it comes to the personal pockets or big contracts that are to be let.
It almost sounds like a conservative Republican's dream country. With no government, it's functioning.
Exactly. The less government, the better.
I've always argued, though, that one of the problems in Lebanon is this very asset of its resilience. I mean, the people have been through civil war for 15 years, tremendous amounts of blood were shed, and yet people were like, get up every day, go to work, do what you have to do. One could be in admiration of that, but you also have to be concerned that that very resilience is what keeps the country from someone not standing up and saying, enough is enough, stop it. Do you get a sense of that there are people in the country who are saying, this has just got to stop?
Well, I get a sense from some of the younger people that, yes, it's got to stop, enough's enough. But they can't really get their foot in the door, so to speak, of the political processes. So many of these people, our ambassador Richard Jones commented to me that he was ambassador to Lebanon 20 years ago. He was in retirement when the State Department called and said, hey, can you help us out in Beirut until we get a permanent ambassador there? After all, you were there 20 years ago. The players are the same then they are today, so you're the only one that knows the players. And that's true. That's one thing that strikes me every time I go back to Lebanon, or how the players have not changed at all. There's no new young blood that's been allowed to.
There was this "You Stink" movement that started, very typically Lebanese also.
Beautiful brand name.
Yeah, a brand that came up over the garbage that hadn't been collected. That was a huge crisis in the country, that they have not been able to work out the contracts on collecting garbage. And so here's some pictures of garbage all over the lining the streets.
Today you'd see that burning. A lot of it, they're burning illegally.
Now,
hazards in the air.
That's the question I had, was that, was it that visible? I mean, this is one picture that I know your folks took.
Yes.
But is it stinking? I mean, is it a mess?
It's not as visible as it was perhaps several weeks ago. This You Stink movement started after my last visit during the summer, around the 1st of July. And it did start over the fact that the basic garbage collection was not being done. And it was cross-sectarian lines. It was Muslim, Christian, it was young, old. It was regardless of your politics, everybody was joining together that way. That's what made it such a unique movement in Lebanese terms. But after a while, even they got into internal bickering and who should benefit and who should not benefit. And there were proposals to send the garbage to Russia, for example, at humongous costs to the Lebanese, who could ill afford such costs today, but all because it lined the pockets of somebody. They weren't sure who, and I'm not sure who, but that's how they viewed it. So they started fighting that. And now, because it has reached such bad proportions, they've started burning it at a time when Beirut's facing enormous rainstorm season. And all that's going to do is spread that garbage into the sewer systems. The burning is spreading it into the air. It's a very unhealthy situation that's getting worse while they continue to bicker over who should get the contracts.
So has the You Stink movement petered out because they started over the garbage, but then turned their focus of You Stink on the government itself and the corruption of the sort of the elites, the warlords that run the political apparatus in the country? Is that movement done? Has it exhausted itself, or is it still operating?
I'm afraid it has exhausted itself. And it did start over the government as well. I mean, that's why it was branded that way. It was not only about the garbage, it was about the government as well when it was initially branded. It's just that in the interim, they've turned much like the government themselves by their own personal bickering among the leaders of it and personal animosities of that nature that has kind of taken the steam out of that movement.
You met a whole bunch of folks across the political spectrum. Were there any promising leaders that you saw, folks that impressed you in Lebanon?
I did not meet with him. He had to cancel the meeting at the last minute with his father, but that's the son of Amin Jamiel, Sami Jamiel, who heads the Kataib Party, who is not a Christian faction, but definitely not aligned with the Jaja al-Yun faction. They've made it quite clear that there's dissatisfaction with that alliance does not represent all Christians, that alliance is more after their own personal interests. That's almost a direct quote. And so there's problems, that's the problems within the Christian community. But he seems to be a young, inspiring type of leader that I think has potential for the future.
Any others?
That's the only one I can think of right off. That's why I said earlier, there's just nobody on the horizon.
You went to the refugee camps,
yes,
both Syrian and Palestinian. I want to start with the Syrian side first. 1 out of every 4 people in the country right now is a Syrian refugee. Did you feel that on the streets? Was that sense? I mean, I'm thinking of America. If we had 100 million refugees in the country, which is what it would be, to be 1 out of 4 at the end of the day, it would be visible. I mean, was it there? Could you feel the fact that there was this huge additional population in the country?
In the camps, yes, you could. 1.6 million refugees, and that's just registered. Countless others are not even registered. God bless the UN relief agencies that are trying under horrendous circumstances to help. Other relief organizations that are in these camps with whom we met, United Youth for Lebanon, another organization trying to help. These people are just doing tremendous work under very difficult circumstances, and they're making a difference. They're giving a lot of these refugees, especially the young ones, hope that they can survive until they return to their homes. And that's what they want to do. They want to return home. They are placing a tremendous burden upon the Lebanese right now, displacing Lebanese jobs because they are willing to work at a much less rate. They can afford to do it at a much cheaper rate than the Lebanese can work many of the jobs. And so there is a strain on the Lebanese economy, infrastructure, and jobs of the Lebanese people.
Are the Lebanese people feeling it? Did you get a sense of,
yes,
is there a tension over this issue?
Yes, yes. And, you know, God forbid there's not been any trouble inside Lebanon yet, as I mentioned earlier, but there's always a potential that even if one of this 1.6 million turns bad, that it could be a spark that ignites a very bad fire.
You talked about the relief agencies. I want to get into that in a minute, but the Lebanese government itself, the ministries and the institutions as they exist, how are they weathering this storm of the stress on classroom size, on medical services, on water and energy, et cetera? I mean, how is Lebanon supporting itself under these circumstances?
Well, in a very difficult way, and I'm not sure I know the full answer to that because it is such a tremendous strain. And Lebanon's debt problems are severe, and their tourism is down dramatically. Empty hotels, the tourist sites are not being visited. That's a drain on their revenues as well. They are looking to the United States for help. We have helped, but not to the degree that I feel we should. They're also looking to the other Arab allies in the region, our Arab allies in the region, other countries in the region, and in the world to help on this tremendous refugee strain on their infrastructure. So they are getting help from other countries.
Palestinians are probably the least understood story in this equation. The Palestinians who left Syria, who were basically had no place to go because the camps were overrun by ISIS and other related groups, they fled into Lebanon and ended up in the Palestinian camps that were already overcrowded. And so you have a double overcrowding. You visited some of the Palestinian camps. I think you were in Shatila?
Yes.
Which had been the scene of that horrific massacre back in the 80s.
1982, September 1982.
Tell me, what did you see there on the Palestinian side in terms of this overcrowding and difficulty? Are the Palestinians in the camps welcoming those who've come in, or is there tension between them?
There's tension, and what was very bad before has gotten very, very, very bad now. There's been no improvements. They are in a certain limited area, and so what has happened, they've had to build up to accommodate the additional refugees. And in building up, it's just very fragile infrastructures, wires hanging all over your heads, as you've probably seen in some of the pictures, disasters waiting to happen of their own without any friction from the outside or from within. So it's a situation just getting worse by the day. And
Tell me about the UN agencies that are working. There's UN agencies, there's American organizations that are there, and there are some Lebanese groups as well. Let's start with the UN in terms of what they are doing. I know that they're short on funds these days.
They are.
And yet have been cutting back on food and other services. But tell me about the groups in general and the kind of work they're doing, and whether or not it's making an adequate enough difference.
Well, it's making a difference. They are, for example, sending young people to schools, and we visited some of the classrooms. They're feeding them as much in order to allow them to survive. They're providing medical care. They're providing as much of an environment in which to keep away from doing bad things as can be expected in such an environment. So they're doing a great deal of positive work in helping these young people stay away from trouble.
Here's the question I ask myself. We always look at these refugee situations as temporary, but they never are. So the question is, 10, 20 years from now, there are probably still going to be 1 million Syrians in Lebanon. And I just don't see the situation. Not that Syria won't be resolved, but that people once there, I mean, people estimate that there's 30,000 Syrian babies being born every day in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey in the refugee areas. That's where there's 4 million almost people in exile right now. Those folks, a generation is going to grow up knowing no home but Lebanon, no home but Jordan, no home but Turkey. Can Lebanon weather that storm?
You know, Lebanon has weathered the storm thus far. The Palestinians that you mentioned, both the Syrian and those that have come in, and you know, it's going to be very tough for Lebanon to continue to weather the storm. But because they have so far, I have a great deal of faith that they're going to be able to. And you're right, a lot of these refugees will, even if the situation is resolved in Syria, will be afraid to go back home, still not believing that they can go home safely and not be massacred. So there's got to be a political solution to the situation in Syria. There's got to be some type of assurances that if they go back home, they won't be massacred, and that they'll have opportunities, job opportunities, and medical care and educational facilities available to them. So there's going to take a lot of rebuilding of these areas in Syria once a political solution is reached.
Tell me about the war next door in Syria. Its impact other than the refugees on Lebanon. I know Hezbollah has crossed the border and has been fighting in Syria, and some groups related to ISIS and the Jabhat Nusra, the Al-Qaeda related group, have crossed into Lebanon and seized some hostages from the Lebanese military. To what extent, when you're in Lebanon, do you feel the war next door? And are there extra security precautions? Is there a sense that that there's a war and it could come here at any moment, or is it a distant war?
I think it's a distant war to many Lebanese. I think they feel a great deal of confidence in their commander, General Kawaji, who is in Washington this week, with whom we met on this trip, who has a great deal of confidence from the Lebanese people. He's doing a tremendous job. His army is both Christians, Shia Muslims, and Sunni Muslims. He's able to instill a confidence that he has the situation under control. And I believe to many Lebanese, they recognize we've been through this before. And inshallah, we don't want this to happen again. Been there, done that. We know what it means to have such fighting. So I think they really are determined to keep that war distant across the border. As I said, the Lebanese army has done a tremendous job. Our government, the United States government, has been stepping up to the plate more so in recent years.
Tell me a little about that, because there was a lot of resistance in the beginning to helping the Lebanese military, the Hezbollah connection and all of that. But we continue to get reports almost every year of huge amounts of military assistance coming. What has changed? What has made the U.S. government more comfortable with the Lebanese military, and how effective is the U.S. assistance that Lebanon is getting right now?
Again, I give the credit all to General Khawaji. I think he has instilled a confidence in American policymakers, in our Pentagon, that the relief, that the assistance that we give the Lebanese army is staying with the Lebanese army. He has answered questions, for example, as he did again this morning before a group of lawmakers in Washington, that anybody questions where our U.S. arms are going when they go to the Lebanese army, he will take them and show him where every armored vehicle, where every piece of equipment American sent is, and assure them it's not in Hezbollah's hands. Hezbollah is a political player in Lebanon. There's no question about it. But as far as the general is concerned, his concern is about Lebanese security, and what happens to what happens to Hezbollah in the future is part of a political negotiations of the countries in the region. So that's, Hezbollah is not his concern. He feels that because Hezbollah is so engaged in Syria now, that the situation in the south, for example, is the best that it's ever been, that calm exists. Yeah, there may be a radical Palestinian or some bad guy that throws a bomb every now and then over into Israel, but he has it under control, working with UNIFIL, as you know, and he feels he has all the borders now under control. You mentioned the Lebanese soldiers that have been held by al-Nusra, I believe it is, or the al-Qaeda linked group. He was able to negotiate the release of some of them back in December. There are still some being held by the terrorist groups, for which he continues to negotiate and tries to seek those Lebanese soldiers' release. But just this morning, for example, the Lebanese army killed 6 ISIS characters on the border, the northeastern border of Lebanon. So his people have the situation under control, and that gives the Lebanese a great deal of confidence that it's a war that's not coming to us.
And the U.S., it gives the U.S. confidence.
Yes, he does have the U.S. confidence. He can call our CENTCOM director, General Alston, and get what he needs in case of emergency rather than wait for it to go through the bureaucratic process.
You spent many years in Congress, and as somebody of Lebanese descent, an Arab American, felt strongly about your Lebanese roots, have seen how Congress dealt with Middle East issues, not always even-handed. Famous, the trip you made to Lebanon in 1982 to meet with Arafat and during the Israeli attacks, and other meetings of the sort that you'd had over the years, establish your bona fides in the region. But when you'd come back to Washington, it wasn't always easy going. Tell me about Congress today and its relationship with Lebanon, not other Middle East issues, but just Lebanon. Is there an understanding? I mean, the Pentagon wants to help, but is there going to be, are there obstacles in Congress to giving that help?
Those obstacles are slowly being overcome. There is greater assistance today for the Lebanese army than I think there ever has been. The feeling in Congress has always been a moral support for Lebanon. And I mean support from Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, across all spectrums in the Congress. Morally, it's always been there. Yes, we need to help Lebanon. They're our friend in the region. But again, coming up with the logistical help has always been tough. But now that logistical help is beginning to wean its way into the LAF and going to good causes. and more that's being demonstrated by our Pentagon to questionable members of Congress. And when they see our Pentagon certifying how good the LAF's doing, then that goes a long way in the halls of Congress to backing up the words with real logistical support to the Army.
Just a word about the rest of the trip. You were in Egypt and you were also in the UAE. You were in Egypt toward the end of January, which was near the anniversary of the revolution of 2000.
January 25th.
2011. But it struck me as somewhat incongruous that while Egypt celebrates that revolution, so many of the young people who helped lead it are in jail. Did the issue of human rights come up during your
yes,
visit
it did.
there?
Yes, it did. You know, I think all of us recognize that the current government of Egypt has a fine line to walk. I mean, they're fighting terrorists in the Sinai. They've had almost daily, that doesn't get to press attention, but instances of terror within Cairo itself and closer to home, so to speak, to the population centers. So they have to be concerned about terror. At the same time, there has to be a space there where freedom of expression, human rights, democratic values, not as we may know them, but at least movement toward such has to be allowed to grow. And I think that the United States needs to recognize how strategic Egypt is, not only because of its location in the region, but because of its vital links to that part of the world. I mean, I could see where Egypt, if they could get their act together, and I believe they will, could play a vital role, perhaps even as a middle person between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and thereby help mediate, be a big mediator in the region like they used to be.
You were in the UAE. You only have like a minute or so left to go. What's your lasting impression of that part of the visit?
Wow, it's so different from the rest.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even run across a pothole in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, as you know. They have a system in place that seems to please every individual in their country. Yes, granted, a lot of them are expats, but they still take care of their people, and their economy seems to be booming. They seem to be affected less by the drop in terrorism to the region than the other countries that we visit, of course. And it just seems to be a country on the move. We went to Madagascar City, which is a city of the future, very environmentally sound, self-sufficient.
Yeah. With a green footprint.
Yes, green footprint. Yes, very, very green footprint. And it's remarkable. That's what the future is about.
It's fascinating. I did some polling for Dubai is hosting the World Expo in 2020, and they asked us to do some polling. And first question I asked them when I said to design the instrument, I said, what are you going to do different at the expo than you're doing every day? Because the country is almost an expo of international community, 193 ethnic groups in the country. Thanks for joining us,
yes,
Congressman.
Thank you.
And sharing your reflections on the trip.
Thank you,
That's all
Jim.
the time we've got right now. For more information, you can follow us on Twitter at AIUSA, and you can see photographs of the trip that Congressman Rahal was talking about on our website at aiusa.org. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week on Viewpoint.